Hello world and welcome to my channel. My name is Jeff and I am that French horror guy. First off, I would like to say that I've been busy this past week with other things I honestly wasn't expecting. That's why this third video is late and will unfortunately feature only 4 movies instead of 5. I'm sorry for the inconvenience and hope the next upload won't be as chaotic. So this video is part 3 of my Slasher Movies Iceberg. We're still in tier 1 and we're gonna explore the next 4 movies of the list. Just a quick reminder before we start to please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing and all that stuff. If you like my work, this will help grow the channel. Thank you for being here, you're much welcome. Make yourself comfortable, and with that being said, let's dive into my Slasher Movies Iceberg. This is part 3. The next movie on our iceberg is April Fool's Day, released in 1986. As its title specifies, April Fool's Day belongs to the subgenre of slasher that take place during a holiday setting, like Halloween, My Bloody Valentine, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Mother's Day, etc. The movie is produced by a famous name in the slasher genre, Frank Mancuso Jr., who is the man behind all the Friday the 13th films until the 7th part, The New Blood, in 1988. And just like the Friday the 13th series, it is also a Paramount Pictures production, allowing the movie a substantial budget of $5 million. Mancuso is also responsible for the casting of Amy Steele, as she has previously starred in Friday the 13th Part 2 in 1981. April Fool's Day was directed by Fred Walton, who previously made When a Stranger Calls in 1979, which we will explore later in the list, and written by Danilo Bach, who wrote the screenplay for Beverly Hills Cop in 1984 that earned him an Oscar nomination. And while we are exploring the movie's crew, let's not forget Charles Bernstein as the music composer, known for his work on The Entity in 1982, Cujo in 1983, and A Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984. The storyline is standard. 9 rich college students plan a party over the April Fool's Day weekend at the remote island mansion of classmate Muffy St. John to celebrate their final year of school. They soon discover that each one of them has a hidden secret from their past, which leads to their death when revealed. According to IMDb, prior to the shooting, the cast gathered in a hotel in Vancouver, Canada, and as a consequence formed a bond amongst themselves that greatly helped their characters' interactions to be believable and natural in front of the camera, and it actually does show in the final product. On the surface level, April's Fool's Day follows a traditional narrative with a nod to the classic whodunit thrillers as well as to Agatha Christie's novel And Then There Were None, also known as 10 Little Indians, where the characters are all carefully guided to a place where they end up being caught and killed one by one by an unknown assailant. However, the movie unravels a story that hides much more than it appears, greatly supported by a very talented cast, a solid storytelling, a sharp direction, and a great production value. April's Fool's Day was one of the last big-budget, non-independent productions of the 80s in the slasher genre, and arguably one of the first to be self-aware enough to provide a story that features characteristics that can be labeled as meta, especially through its mind-blowing twist ending that I won't spoil here, don't worry. Yet that aspect has been viewed by some as a component leading to the death of the genre, not unlike what would happen with Scream a decade later. This shocker of an ending therefore turns out to be quite dividing, and how the individual viewer reacts to the final explanation of the events that have taken place will almost certainly determine their opinion of the film as a whole. At the time of its release, April's Fool's Day was critically quite well received, thanks to its low level of graphic violence and its unique story, and was a nice success at the box office, eventually grossing $13 million domestically. Our next movie on the list is the Slumber Party Massacre, which came out in 1982. The Slumber Party Massacre has a very interesting start, as at the root of the project was a screenplay written by author and feminist activist Rita Mae Brown, who was known at the time for her 1973 coming-of-age autobiographical novel Ruby Fruit Jungle. Titled Sleepless Night, her script was a parody of the slasher genre and all its cliches. It then found its way to legendary producer Roger Corman, who got it rewritten as a straightforward story and given the new title of Don't Open the Door. At the same time, Amy Holden-Jones, who was still a film editor, wanted to make a feature film and picked Brown's script. As a way to find funding, she and her husband, cinematographer Michael Chapman, shot 3 scenes over a weekend and presented them to Roger Corman, who liked what he saw and agreed to produce the movie through his company New World Pictures. It's at that point that the movie received the title we now know, The Slumber Party Massacre. The plot sticks to a classic storyline. A group of high school female students plan a slumber party one night, but a maniac who just escaped a mental asylum prowls the neighborhood, wielding a huge power drill as a weapon. From the get-go, it's obvious that the movie won't take itself too seriously. Just look at the poster. Our killer, posing with his drill in front of lightly dressed young girls, is a pretty blatant phallic symbolism. Hello, Dr. Freud. For her debut as a director, Amy Jones does a great job of keeping things light and entertaining during the obligatory character development scenes, with the help of talented young actresses like Michelle Michaels, Robin Steele, Debra DeLiso, Jennifer Meyers, and Gina Smika Hunter. The main female characters get a bit more depth than usual, each with their own interests and unique personalities, and are presented outside their relationships with men, which once again strikes as different from the movies of the time. There is also a real sense of camaraderie among these young women, and when the killer finally hits, they rally together to help each other out. And even then, they actually fight for their lives, contrary to the usual female characters in other slasher movies. The Slumber Party Massacre stands out also by ditching the usual mystery around the killer, introducing him right away. And Michael Villela does a great job in portraying Russ Thorne as this mute and brute psycho killer with no apparent motivation for his killings other than his own sick pleasure, and this leads to reasonably intense death scenes. Despite having been rewritten as a serious movie, there are still enough elements kept from the original Brown's script to set itself apart from other films of the time, with its humor and tongue-in-cheek aspects, bringing a very different vibe than what was done at the time and gaining a lot of affection from the audience. The Slumber Party Massacre turns out to be a very likable movie, despite being at times a bit weak and predictable. The attempt at being different is noticeable and comes as a great idea, yet it's never developed enough to go beyond the usual cliches the movie seemingly wants to subvert. But despite all that, the movie is still a fun and definitely unconventional slasher, playing with the genre boundaries and exuding a fair amount of charms. The next place of the iceberg, we find Terror Train, released in 1980. Twin brother of Prom Night, Terror Train was also launched as a quick follower of Halloween's success. It's also an American and Canadian co-production. It also stars Jamie Lee Curtis, and the two films were actually shot back-to-back in 1979. As they didn't have their own slasher movie yet, 20th Century Fox quickly jumped on the opportunity and picked Terror Train for distribution, allegedly allowing it quite a fair amount of marketing budget. Producer Daniel Grudnick has always admitted his willingness to cash on the success of the time, as he wrote the first treatment of the movie literally as a Halloween on a train, unquote, before Thomas Drake eventually penned the final screenplay. The film was also the first motion picture directed by Canadian director Roger Spottiswoode, who was an editor until then, his most notable credit being his editing work on Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs in 1972. He was actually hired on the condition that he would edit the film as well. Terror Train would eventually launch his career, as he later directed many films like Shoot to Kill in 1988, Turner and Hooch in 1999, the 1997 James Bond flick Tomorrow Never Dies, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's 2000 sci-fi thriller The Sixth Day. Terror Train, although it doesn't show in its title like others do, takes place during a holiday setting, namely here New Year's Eve. A group of medical students pull a prank on another one, named Kenny, played by Derek McKinnon, but the plan fails miserably, and as a result, poor Kenny is sent straight to an insane asylum. 7 years later, all the medical students' corps are about to celebrate New Year's Eve on board a train during a costume party that even features a magician, played by none other than David Copperfield himself. But it looks like Kenny has escaped, boarded the train, put on a costume, and is now out to seek his revenge. All the classic elements of the genre are here. The masked killer out for revenge, the group of teens in a secluded area having a party, characters wandering off to investigate strange sounds, sharp objects as murder tools, etc., etc. And Scream Queen Jamie Lee Curtis as a bonus. Despite all these classic elements, Terror Train succeeds anyway in building tension and atmosphere in an efficient way. Also, the movie features a couple of assets that strengthen its relevance. First, as being set on a moving train, with all the claustrophobia that it brings. And second, by making it a costume party, which helps the killer blend into the crowd and hide in plain sight. With its long, dark and shadowy corridors, Terror Trains builds an increasing suspense as the characters are picked and killed one by one, and the fact that the killer puts on the costume of his last victim every time he kills one really adds to the tension. Terror Train combines a nice dose of gloom, an engaging mystery, and strong acting to create a pretty good film. The train setting adds a natural sense of claustrophobia, and Spottiswoode effectively uses that to the film's advantage. Greatly helped by his cinematographer John Alcott, who worked with none other than the master himself, Stanley Kubrick, on Barry Lyndon in 1976 and The Shining in 1980. Yet, the movie obediently stays into the tracks. See what I did there? The train? The tracks? No? Alright. Moving on. It never rises beyond the basic tropes of the slasher genre and follows its paper-thin storyline without real genius. Terror Train is your by-the-book, typical slasher movie of early 80s. Expertly done and never really boring, but ultimately quite harmless. The next movie on our iceberg introduces us to another legendary name amongst the horror genre after Wes Craven, as we have now The Funhouse, released in 1981 and directed by the late great Tobe Hooper. It all began with a script from Larry Block, which Universal Pictures bought in 1980, hoping to catch the same success train that Paramount did with Friday the 13th. When Tobe Hooper was selected to direct, it would mark his first big studio project, as his earlier films, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974 and Eaten Alive in 1976, were both independent films. As a bit of trivia, The Funhouse was also the very first movie to feature a soundtrack using Dolby Surround sound system. What do you mean nobody cares? The film begins with Amy, played by Elizabeth Berridge, sneaking out for a double date at a local carnival. The four friends are having a great time until one of them suggests they spend the night in the Funhouse, a well-known dark ride. Suddenly, their fun turns into a nightmare when they witness a shocking murder and are pursued by a deranged Barker, played by Kevin Conway, and his deformed son Gunther, portrayed by mime Wayne Doba. From the very start, with the opening credits featuring creepy carnival mannequins and their unsettling stiff movements, Tobe Hooper sets his intention to make a monster movie rather than just another slasher. The nods to classic horror like The Wolfman and Frankenstein in the background only add to that vibe. The film hasn't even fully started and Tobe Hooper is already establishing a chilling mood, showcasing his immense talent as a filmmaker. Furthermore, the first scene plays as an obvious homage to the infamous shower scene from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, followed by another one which cites this time John Carpenter's Halloween. Things are definitely up to a great start. The first half of the movie follows the two couples as they explore the carnival from an attraction to another. Everything starts off light and fun, but before long, things start to take a turn to a growing sense of unease. With another director behind the camera, this probably would have been a boring succession of heavy scenes, but here we journey on a slow and creepy build-up, filled with increasingly odd characters. This eerie feeling being increased by the fact that Kevin Conway plays three different Barkers. To enhance this atmosphere, the movie benefits from a stunning production design as well as a splendid photography by cinematographer Andrew Laszlo, who uses a gorgeous anamorphic widescreen cinematography. All of which clearly elevate the movie from a simple slasher film into a stylish art house film. Plus, the 35-piece orchestral score by John Beal plays a crucial role in creating that horrific atmosphere, ramping up the suspense and tension. As soon as our characters find themselves trapped into the funhouse, things become much more intense. But the movie focuses also on the same level on the relation between the Barker and his deformed son Gunther. Similar to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Funhouse explores the theme of a freaky and monstrous family and the strange connections that come with it. There's definitely a tragic side to Gunther's deformity. He is not a bad guy, he just wants to be loved and accepted like everyone else. The connection to 1931 Frankenstein is pretty clear, especially since Gunther wears the monster mask over his deformed face, a face that was designed by the great special effect makeup artist Rick Baker in association with Craig Riordan. Finally, the ending of the Funhouse, that I won't spoil, hits really hard, leaving the audience with a confused and cold feeling. Tobe Hooper has masterfully created a movie that's powerful, grim, and unnerving. By focusing on character depth and a gripping atmosphere, he makes sure the pacing never slows down. Thanks in large part to its more classic approach to horror and suspense, the Funhouse holds up considerably better than the majority of slashers that flooded the screens at the time. Sadly, it was a commercial disappointment at the time of its release in 1981, but with time, despite being a bit overshadowed by Tobe Hooper's more famous films, the Funhouse has since been rightfully recognized as an underrated gem. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching my video. I appreciate it a lot. Please consider liking and subscribing, this will help grow the channel. My name is Jeff, I am that French horror guy, and I will see you, hopefully, in the next video. Until then, goodbye.